Welcome to another edition of Focus on Alternatives, brought to you by ADISA, the Alternative and Direct Investment Securities Association. For more information about alternative investments, please visit adisa.org, and while you're there, check out the resource library. My name is Greg Mausz. I'm joined today by Paulina Stannard. She is the head of impact at CI Private Wealth. Thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to talk about ESG and the current environment around ESG. So do you think that ESG is being politicized right now?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. But right off the bat, I think it's really important to distinguish a couple things. You need to have opposing viewpoints in order for something to be politicized appropriately. And ESG is not a set of viewpoints. It's actually just a set of factors around environmental, social, and governance issues, and whether those factors are integrated or not into a company's operations. So, to bring it to life on the environmental front, how is an organization interacting with its environment and community around it? Socially, is it treating its employee base and customers well? Mm-hmm. And on the governance side, are there checks and balances in place to make sure that the decision-making process is sound? And all else equal, those factors, I think we'd all agree, deserve to be a part of the investment process. But that's not what everyone's focused on.
Fair enough. So you don't think that it should be, but it is. Then why is it being politicized?
So I think the distinction between the why and the how is the breakdown.
Okay.
So in terms of the why, all of those issues I just outlined seem to be inherent in the investment due diligence process. We should be looking at those things anyway. And I think investors and individuals on both sides of the aisle would agree that if you don't treat the environment well, there won't be a planet left to live on. Mm-hmm. If you alienate or exploit the humans you're interacting with, there won't be much of a business left, and then governance is probably the most important piece from a risk perspective. So I think we're all in agreement about the why. It's the how. How do we get to a place where we feel confident in those factors that I mentioned?
And so is that why people are taking sides? It's over the how.
It's over the how. And again, I would like to see the conversation just dissipate, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to do two things: make money and do the right thing. That's what we should be focused on. The current issue, however, rightfully so, is that there's a big data ask. And so right now the government is asking for organizations to provide data points on those factors I mentioned, and that can be pretty resource intensive. Mm-hmm. And we haven't fully proven exactly how those data points are going to be used and if they're even valid.
And it can be a big burden on business.
It can be a huge burden, a time suck and a resource suck. And so there's a very valid argument to say, why am I incented to do that? And then furthermore, I think there's a fear, appropriately so, that they may be used in a way that jeopardizes meritocracy in the workplace, or in some way threatens the free capital market system that we all strive for. On the other hand, part of that free market society is an implied contract with two pieces around data. We need to have access to it, and it needs to be accurate. Right. And currently, it's the government and regulatory bodies' responsibility to ensure that. And so those two pieces are sort of in conflict. Like, I don't want to provide the data, but at the same time, investors really need it in order to make sound decisions and evaluate risks in businesses.
Fair enough. So how do you think we fix this?
I don't have a perfect solution in terms of the government piece. But what I think is perhaps more important is focusing on what we're talking about relative to the rest of the universe. For every $1 that governments and nonprofits deploy every year, there's $10 that the investment community has access to. That is a tremendous opportunity just in and of itself from a dollar perspective. Then when we think about the differences in structure, investment dollars can do a lot more than government and philanthropic dollars can. We are actually incented in the investment community to address problems differently, to build strategic solutions to things, to take risks. Our time horizon is different. And so all of that means that actually the innovation happens and change happens, regardless of which side of those factors you're on. The change happens in the investment community, not really the government or philanthropic community as much.
Interesting. So is it really the investment community's responsibility to lead in all these social, environmental, and governance ways?
Not necessarily. Certainly that's not the implied contract that the investment community is responsible for solving all of the world's problems. But at the same time, again, purely from an alpha-seeking perspective, a lot of our global challenges and gaps in the solution set happen to exist where there are social and environmental problems. So again, just purely from an investment thesis perspective, that's where the dollars are flowing, not because we think it's our responsibility to solve the world's problems, but we know that we can make a heck of a lot of money trying and be rewarded for taking that risk.
Well, thank you for laying all that out. I know that was a tricky subject, so really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I guess one example that I think might be helpful, and maybe it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but look, at one point we were walking around or using horse and buggies, and it was inefficient and tiring, but no one said, hey, I hope someone just drops an alternative, down on my doorstep. No, it was the investment community and private capital that innovated to come up with the car.
Right.
And then, over time realized there's a better way to do this. Let's make this more efficient. So the assembly line came into play. That brought costs down and cars more accessible and equitable. But then again, eventually regulation is kind of needed. We have to know if we're driving on the right or the left and have speed limits. And that was actually welcomed with open arms. And nonprofits play a role in a lot of other ways as well. And so as we think about how these three capital participants interact, there's a role for all of them, but it's a reminder that the innovation comes from the investment community and is supported from the others.
Right, so let the free markets drive ahead, but let some governments put the guardrails on there so that nobody drives off the road.
Exactly.
Great. Any final thoughts to share with us?
I am optimistic that additional education on a lot of these issues will hopefully give people the comfort that they need and to focus less on the government involvement, so to speak, and more on the incredible opportunity that exists in the marketplace.
Paulina, thank you for taking the time out with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you for watching another episode of Focus on Alternatives. Again, for more information about ESG or alternative investing, please visit ADISA.org. Thank you.